What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast, Mass Media Hysteria. My name is Court. I will be your host for the duration. With me, as always, is Chris.
How's it going, everybody?
Normally, this would be Andris's week to be here, but he's feeling a little bit under the weather. So we just want to wish him A, a happy birthday, which was a couple days ago, and B, a speedy recovery. We're sure he's going to be just fine. Today's going to be a bit of a shorter show for a couple of reasons. One, we only have two topics to get to, and two, we just did 15 minutes before realizing that we forgot to press record. So,
like the professionals we are.
Yeah, rookie mistake. So the two topics we have today, because there wasn't much in the world of entertainment news, we're going to be doing spoiler reviews of the new Tom Hanks sci-fi movie Finch, as well as, of course, Marvel's Eternals. These will be spoiler reviews. We're not going to hit every story beat, but we will talk about them fairly in depth. So we will get to that in a second. As per usual, we want to encourage you guys to click like on this video if you did enjoy the podcast. It helps the video get out there. It helps the channel grow. We appreciate that very much. And of course, jump into the comments. Let us know what you thought of these movies. I do read all the comments and respond when I can, so don't think your thoughts are being unread. And of course, we want to let you know that if you don't have time to watch a long ass YouTube video, you can always go to places like Google Podcasts or Spotify for audio only versions of this podcast. So check that out if that's your thing. And you're already on my YouTube channel. Why not click subscribe? It'll make you feel great or something like that. So moving on, we are going to go into our first topic, which is the movie Finch. This came out on Apple TV Plus this past Friday. It stars Tom Hanks as a guy named Finch living in a post-apocalyptic world. We never quite learn exactly what happened. We understand that it had something to do with solar flares, and there are massive holes in the ozone layer, which make it impossible to be in direct sunlight if you're a human or a dog. The film, again, then Tom Hanks, whose character Finch, we know he was kind of a wunderkind as a kid at coding and whatever. He's slowly building a robot to take care of his dog should anything happen to him. So the film stars Tom Hanks, Caleb Landry Jones, who does the voice and the mocap for the robot Jeff, and a dog named Seamus, who is very cute. Even though I know the answer to this because of our little dry run there, Chris, before I ask you what you thought, was this movie on your radar? Were you looking forward to it?
This movie has been on my radar for a bit. It was originally titled BIOS from like a few years back. So it's been in production for a while. I wouldn't say I was really excited for it, but I was kind of intrigued. I like the premise, kind of like the quick blurb that's on IMDb, essentially is Tom Hanks. And I said this joke last time, but Tom Hanks playing Tom Hanks. He lives in a post-apocalyptic world. And like you said, pretty much the thrust of the story is that Tom Hanks builds a sentient robot with it has multiple directives, but it really is like the main directive is to take care of this dog, a real like not human dog, a real life dog, after Tom Hanks passes. Because
and since we're spoiling things, we clearly learn that he has some kind of terminal illness.
Yeah. So it's even if you went in not knowing anything, within the first 5 minutes, they convey pretty heavily that, like, it's not really going well. Like you said, Court, they don't say exactly what really happened other than there was like a solar flare, but now there's the ozone layer is like Swiss cheese that Tom Hanks says multiple times. And there's just a ton of radiation that's coming through because the atmosphere is affected. And radiation in humans or mammals, they don't mix. So
particularly if you've seen Chernobyl.
Oh, geez. Yeah. So it's no bueno. But yeah, so I would say I would say I was actually kind of surprised by this movie. I didn't love it by any means. I don't think it's like this is great or amazing, but I was expecting less creativity from it. And even though there's a lot of familiarity as far as the story goes, you were mentioning before, but it feels very much like I Am Legend at times. It's very much like WALL-E. I mean, the beginning is just kind of like, this deserted kind of brownish apocalyptic world. And there's even a little robot called Dewey that follows Tom Hanks along to kind of scavenge for stuff. So very Wall-E like. Dewey, by the way, in the robot is a reference to the film Silent Running, which is also a quite good movie that has kind of a similar premise. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just because I wasn't quite sure what to expect from this movie that I was like, all right, I was entertained throughout it. I have some gripes with it. There's one major storytelling choice that happens quite often in this movie that we'll get to, that I thought was odd that they kept doing, like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the best way to tell your story. But overall, I would say I was entertained.
Okay. As I mentioned in our little dry run there, I was quite looking forward to this movie once it came on my radar because I love Tom Hanks and I love sci-fi and I think robots are cool and dogs. I didn't love this movie. There were things about it that I really liked. Tom Hanks's performance. And I did really like, as we were saying, Caleb Landry Jones as the robot, whose name is Jeff, I think did a wonderful job. And it's further proof why I think it's always better to have an actor on set to play off the other actors, give them something to interact with, but also rather than just creating a CGI robot in post, the CGI technicians have an actual performance to work with, because Caleb Landry Jones really does imbue this character, this Jeff the robot, with these little mannerisms and this voice that slowly throughout the course of the film, and the film only, like as you mentioned, the film only takes place over the course of a few days, but Tom Hanks, Finch, creates this robot. And at first it's very primitive. Well, I don't want to say primitive, it's a freaking robot, but you know what I mean. And over the course of the next few days, as it learns from Finch, it becomes more and more human in its speech patterns, in its movements. You even mentioned, or I mentioned that, like, I hated the voice Finch was using at first, but it slowly, gradually becomes a lot more human. And it was done very subtly, which I thought was wonderful. And by the end, it's still a robot, but there is a humanity there that I don't think you necessarily would have found if they just got an actor to go into an ADR booth and they just CGI'd this robot. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. You can really feel the performance coming through by Caleb Landry Jones. Just there's so much more, physicality that needs to be brought into an actor's performance when they're doing CGI, when they're doing mocap. But especially for a character like this, where unlike, let's say, Gollum or Caesar from the recent Planet of the Apes movies, that has a lot of human features in facial expressions, Jeff the robot, which he calls himself, by the way, he chooses the name Jeff. It's pretty much a blank face. It has eyes in kind of a human shaped head, but it doesn't really have a mouth. And so all the expressions come from the demeanor that Caleb brings to the character. And I thought it was really good. I thought it was really good physical performance.
Yeah, it's a lot of like body language. I mean, this sounds so obvious, but without an actor there, it might not have been. Where, if he's sad, his posture kind of crumples, or if he's curious about something, he'll sort of just cock his head to the side. These little subtle things that go really a long way for me.
Absolutely, yeah. So I thought he did a great job. I also wanted to mention that I thought the special effects for Jeff the robot in particular, I thought were quite good. I could be wrong. I'd like to look more into how they did this, but I think that it might have been a mixture of CGI and some practical effects, maybe just for a few shots. I could be completely wrong, but that's all to say that I thought that the effect was very convincing. Like, it never stood out to me like, oh my gosh, here's this cartoon. There's just, Tom Hanks and a gritty set, and there's a cartoon. I bought it. I really bought Jeff the robot as a character. And that's really what special effects are, not what they're only supposed to do, but I really appreciate when special effects don't try to like take away, like they don't try to like draw attention to it itself, and it really just helps enable the story. So I thought,
I thought the CGI throughout this movie is actually quite strong.
Yeah.
Even the robots aside, when you see like the incoming storms and all that, I thought that all looked
Yeah.
really good. But Jeff himself, there were a couple of shots that looked a little bit off for me, but for the
Mhm.
most part, that looked like a tactile puppet that was
Yeah.
on set, which
Yeah.
I think for the most part it was not.
Yeah, definitely, I can buy that. There was a couple shots, like you said, that can stick out of my mind. Like there's one towards the end of him just kind of sitting in a field with Tom Hanks that you could tell, like, that he's not really there. But then there's other times where he's like wearing a coat and kind of interacting with the dog, and Tom Hanks. That, yeah, again, I just, it's not that it was like I couldn't tell the difference, but I wasn't thinking this is a CGI character.
Yeah.
I was just watching the character.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
kind of I was just kind of buying it. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. The special effects for this were actually not like mind blowing or anything, but they were used sparingly, and when they were used, it was quite good. Like some great overhead shots of kind of desolate post apocalyptic cities. It was convincing.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie, we said in the first time we tried to do this, is executive produced by Robert Zemeckis, and its production company, one of them is Amblin Studios, which is Steven Spielberg's production company. And both for better and worse, I felt like this was an Amblin movie. Like a lot, so much about the script, from the dialogue to the story structure, the pacing of it, it felt like a movie that could have came out in the 80s or early 90s. It was like an 80s kind of script, but with a very modern visual aesthetic. And again, there are good things about that and negative things. Before I say what I think the good and the bad are, did you get that feeling of it?
Absolutely. And you know, as you were just talking right now, it's got a bit of an ET thing happening,
Yeah.
which I hadn't thought of until just now. And I mean, you want to talk Amblin? I mean, that's the freaking Amblin logo right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's definitely got a bit of an ET thing. I was saying earlier that, well, you had mentioned that this screenplay had been on the blacklist, which is this list of some of the best screenplays in Hollywood that haven't been made yet for whatever reason. They don't have investors, or they don't think they'd make money. But and we were both saying we'd be curious to see, sort of, because presumably the screenplay has gone through a number of drafts. Be curious to see what the original iteration was like, because I did feel like this maybe was a little bit kidified. Like this almost feels like a kid's movie or a family movie, but with some heavy like overtones. But I wonder if it was in its original form a little bit more bleak, a little bit more cerebral, which I think I would have liked better, because that's just my kind of thing. What do you think?
Yeah, it definitely makes me wonder if it kind of got amplified, and made it kind of more of that kid friendly kind of movie that you would see in the 80s that would be produced by Amblin, where things like Gremlins and Poltergeist and stuff, where they're simultaneously still able to be watched by kids, but maybe a little bit older kids. Like there's still a bit of maturity to it. Like people cuss and people get hurt, and there's actual stakes, but it's also kind of goofy. And there's a big section kind of early in the first act that was a little too silly for me, where Jeff the robot is just been booted up essentially, and it has to learn how to do things, how to function, mostly just motor function, so like walking. And that's fine, and that's kind of cute, and that reminded me of like in a good way, it reminded me of an Amblin film, like where Spielberg and in kind of his acolytes at that time, they would really kind of stop to wonder at the special effects. It wasn't just like, here's a robot, isn't he a badass? It's kind of like, whoa, cool, isn't it neat? And he's kind of like, oh, he's learning how to walk, that's kind of funny and cute. But it went on for quite a while, and what really irritated me is that there was multiple sort of like reaction shots where like the robot would do something, and then Tom Hanks would like do that kind of face, and then it would cut to the dog.
Yeah.
Remember, there's an actual dog here, and the dog would be like the dog makes a face, and it's like, come on, what
they cut to that dog way too much.
I mean, I love the dog, and I think they used the dog well as it went on, but in the beginning, it really felt like a little kid's movie of cutting to the facial reactions of this dog, that it's like the dog wouldn't comprehend what's happening right now. The dog would just be like, be dogs just zone out, man. They wouldn't like look at you like, oh, there he goes again.
Right.
And if it happened once or twice, I maybe could have forgiven it, but it happened several times. Yeah.
I'll be honest. I liked the very opening of the movie.
Uh-huh.
Basically, I was into it until he kind of booted up Jeff, and then I kind of didn't like the movie until the third act, because I feel like this movie is at its best when it's being relatively serious, and the first two acts were so goofy and so silly and kind of hokey, and it was a lot of Jeff learning to become more human. And like I said earlier, I did like the way they showed his transition into being more human, but it was literally like pratfalls, and there were moments where I expected to hear like ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba. Like it was too much to like. I felt a little bit cringy with all that stuff. Once the third act comes, we start getting some more tension and some more impending death and all that kind of stuff. And I think maybe for some kids that'll be too heavy and too heady. I personally wanted more of that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I could see definitely what you mean. I think that it leaned kind of too heavily on the kid friendliness in the beginning, but I still found a lot of moments that I liked throughout. There's a lot of like individual moments. That there's one in particular that it wasn't really too silly, but it was still lighthearted, where Finch is essentially teaching Jeff kind of how to, like, this is how you forage. This is how you go into abandoned buildings and you do this and take the initiative to find stuff. And him teaching him that, there was still some bumbling in it, but it was it also had some nice moments of levity of like the earth is radiated like severely, and there's a moment where Finch finds a really old bag of popcorn, and the robot at first is just like, what, you can't eat that, it's super old. And Finch tells the robot, like, this, a lesson you should learn is to live a little. And he starts pouring the popcorn, and because it's radiated, it just starts popping out in the open. And it's not serious, it's not super goofy, but it's just a little moment of levity that kind of hits home to what the theme of the film is, which is to live, like to use the time that you have on life to the fullest. So little moments like that were peppered throughout that kept me interested enough in the second act, I think.
And I'll say, I actually thought that moment, like, I thought it was a little bit funny to me. I thought that moment was really kind of beautiful. Like, I really did like that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that maybe it just, this movie is a little under 2 hours. I think maybe they could have trimmed a bit off of it just to in the middle. Because I agree that like it gets pretty heavy towards the end, and I enjoyed the drama of it. But something that was irritating me more than just the kind of the levity in the beginning was, it happened, I believe, at least 3 times, but there's a recurring thing. There's recurring moments that happen where Tom Hanks is just telling stories to Jeff, and he starts off with Once Upon a Time. And the first time they did it, it was kind of funny because Jeff was trying to figure out what he meant by it. But then they kept doing it even close to the very end, where it just kind of felt like a lazy way of kind of conveying backstory. Where off the top of my head, I can't think of a better way, but it was, I don't know. It really felt like the movie just kind of came to a halt, and Tom Hanks was like, "Let me tell you a story," and it's like, okay, I don't know. Like the fact that they kept doing that stood out to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I will say, I thought a couple of the stories he tells, essentially monologues, particularly like kind of the last one, or there are a couple towards the end that are both really good. But it did feel like a little bit jarring that, like, now we're going to transition into the next act. We need a little story to get us there.
Yeah. It felt kind of contrived on a writing level, but at the same time, it's Tom Hanks giving monologues, and so he does it. He's such an old pro at this point that of course he does it terrifically. And despite my complaints about how contrived it feels, you like you said, there were some good stories, especially towards the end. And now we're in kind of, I'll say again, spoilers for sure. But by the end, when he's telling the story of how he met Dog, which he calls Dog, but he also calls it Goodyear. And that's kind of a tragic story, and it kind of really illustrates why he has such a distrust of other humans. Because throughout the entire movie, you really don't see any other human being other than Tom Hanks, and he is petrified of seeing any other humans. Like there's a pretty tense moment of another car following him on the highway, and he's freaking out. And you can kind of piece together, like, yeah, post-apocalyptic world. I've seen other movies like this. I'm sure humans are awful scavengers. But there's one particular story that he tells of like a mother and her child kind of getting into a violent altercation over just groceries, essentially. And it's heavy. And you could feel the pain that memory holds on Finch, and the guilt he had of just kind of not knowing what to do and hiding in a situation where this violence was erupting around him. So I thought that was quite good.
Yeah, I did really like that scene. And actually, when he's telling that story, you see a mother and a daughter in this flashback.
Yeah.
They are the only two other people in the film.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, at one point, Jeff goes into this, I think it's a mall or a department store or something, and he's kind of scavenging for stuff, and he puts on a coat and he's kind of being silly. And Tom Hanks comes in and says, like, you don't have any common sense. Can you not tell that there's something wrong with this place? We got to get out of here. Mm-hmm. Obviously suggesting that there are probably people watching them who want to hurt them and take their stuff and take his robot. And, and then it's kind of a car chase, in the middle of the night, and they're driving down the highway in their RV and somebody's following them, and they have to hide under a bridge, which messes up the RV pretty badly. And I kind of wish there had been more of that in this movie, because I did find that was kind of one of the more exhilarating sequences. And then it kind of didn't go anywhere. But it does sort of get the Finch character to essentially, he's like giving up. He's saying, I can't do this anymore. We're just going to die. It is what it is. The whole movie, the whole movie's kind of a road trip. They're trying to go to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. We find out why towards the very end, which we'll get to, but it's Finch kind of giving up, and Jeff saying, no, we can do this. I believe in you. And he's like, well, we shouldn't. You shouldn't believe in me, blah, 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 blah. And it was kind of a sad moment, but I feel like if there had been a little bit more of that tension, I would have connected with that moment a little bit more. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. It does feel like there's long stretches where not too much occurs. And I think that adding a little bit more stakes in this time or in this movie could have kind of helped it flow a little better. Because there really isn't too much stakes. Like there's a storm that comes and passes, and that's kind of tense for a little bit. I like that sequence where they were being followed, but it mostly felt like this is just, everything's just so desolate. It doesn't even really feel like there's other humans in this world anymore. And so there's not really too much stakes other than the fact that Tom Hanks is, coughing up blood because dying of radiation poisoning is the absolute worst. So there's stakes there, but it also feels like from pretty early on, you could figure out that he's not going to make it. So it just feels less like we're trying to beat the clock to save Finch, and more just like, well, we have to go somewhere. We have to go somewhere for the dog. But what also lowered the stakes was that well before the ending, they like Tom Hanks was saying that the sky is Swiss cheese, the ozone layer. They find stretches of the planet, or the country at least, that are not over radiated. That, maybe the ozone layer is intact enough here so they can survive. The dog can go outside and it's fine. And that happens surprisingly earlier on than I thought it should, because at that point it's like, well, they're fine. Like Finch is going to die. That sucks. But the dog can go outside now. The robot is pretty sentient now. Even if the RV breaks down, they could kind of hoof it, or they could, figure it out. There really didn't seem like there was this narrative thrust. There wasn't like anything propelling the story happening after a certain point.
Right. And I did find this movie like quite predictable. I mean,
Yeah.
like you kind of knew that Finch was gonna die.
Yeah.
And then after he does, and I will say I did, there's a scene where he puts on this nice suit, nice white hat, and he's sitting outside with Jeff. And he basically tells a story of how, like, when he was a kid, his dad left the family and sent them a postcard from the Golden Gate Bridge saying, I hope to meet you one day. And then he never met him. But Finch bought this suit for the day that he would meet his father. So he wanted to go to the Golden Gate Bridge and whatever. And then basically he has a coughing fit and says, okay, I'm going to go inside. And then he dies. And we, what broke me, and knowing that you're a dog lover, I'm sure this hit you pretty hard too, but we sort of see him take his last breath, and then it cuts outside of the RV, and all we do is hear this dog Goodyear just kind of howl, like crying.
Yeah.
That hit me pretty fucking hard.
Yeah, man, it's a movie that'll make you want to hug your dog. And it was funny because I was watching it with my wife, and I didn't hear, we weren't talking throughout the movie, and I was just kind of focused on the movie, and like it was hit, I was like feeling it, but I wasn't tearing up. I was like, oh man, this is sad. Where's my dog? I want to hug my dog. But I looked over, my wife was sobbing. So it definitely, and I guess her my in-laws, her mom watched the movie over the weekend as well, and she was also sobbing at that moment. So it's certainly, that moment at least is hitting people in the spot that I think they want it to.
Right.
Granted, it's, you know, it's kind of easier. I not easier, but whenever you introduce like a cute dog into a movie, I think it's kind of shorthand to like, okay, how you have to be a monster not to be sad about a dog crying.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I felt like it was earned at that point. Even if some people might find the howling to be melodramatic, I was like, nah, that's fine. I enjoyed it, and even though, like you said, it was predictable, I thought it was handled well. And then sort of this Viking, what I liked right after was kind of this Viking funeral that they gave him, which they didn't really draw attention to it, but they were talking about it. I think like one of the postcards or one of the pictures was talking about like a Viking funeral. Like they had a picture of a Viking funeral, and they were talking about being Vikings and going out into the world and exploring. And I thought it was interesting because Finch himself said that he didn't really, he just never got around to it. Again, which reinforces this theme of not wasting the time that you have, which I quite like, and I kind of resonate with, especially you're nearly 2 years since COVID started, and having all of last year just me sitting inside. Now that I'm vaccinated and stuff, watching a movie like this really made me feel like I really should go out and just do shit more. Do more shit with my life, because life is short. You never know what's going to happen. So I liked the theme of it as well.
Well, and I totally, I get that. I did think it was kind of funny that, like, after the death scene, Jeff is pretty sad, and he's sitting there on the floor of the RV, and he's like, what am I going to do now? And in my head, I was like, you're going to drive to the Golden Gate Bridge with the dog, and then the movie's going to end. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, it was a nice ending, but it was just so telegraphed,
Yeah. No, I agree. It's like, when he said that, I was thinking, like, is there something I'm missing? Like, I know that the RV's solar panels were broken. So is there going to be another issue where they just can't make it? No, they make it, and it's fine.
Yep.
One last positive thing I'll say before we kind of wrap this up. There were little touches of world building that I kind of liked throughout. I like the suit. Excuse me, sorry. I like the suit that Tom Hanks wears when he has to go out into the radiated places. We've seen obviously like life-preserving suits in space movies or science fiction movies before, but I like the way that this worked, and I liked his little compound. And also little things throughout, like there's a moment where I think Jeff stops in an area where he shouldn't have because it looks like there's a trap. I really like the interior of it, and there's a moment where they're walking through this hallway, and up above, plastered on the windows, are like X-ray like diagrams. Like it's essentially like the sheets that can only be seen if once they're radiated, they're x-rays, and it was littered all over the windows. And of course you could see right through it because outside the sun is just like beaming down radiation. And they don't draw attention to it. It was just a little thing that I quite liked. It's also at the end, there was some nice cinematography. I thought there was some nice like tableaus where they do like wide shots of one in particular standing in my mind of them on the Golden Gate Bridge, and the familiar bright red kind of steel that the gate is known for is kind of covered in this green moss. And then they go onto the bridge, and him and Dog are just standing in front of this the gate, or essentially the fence on the side, whatever it's called, to say the thing that should stop people from falling over. And it's just littered with notes and pictures that you would see after like an event like this. So little things like that made this little movie feel more alive than it would have. It felt like there was some nice thought and care put into the production design.
I actually thought the production design was really strong. And you mentioned his suit, and it was just like, it looked cool. It looked tactile. It looked really grimy. Like it wasn't like a 2001, an Interstellar, like everything's pristine. It was, that was nice attention to detail for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have too much more to say, so I'll wrap it up. That I thought that it was entertaining enough. It's not great. It's certainly not going to be in my like top favorites of the year. But I'm glad that I watched it. Tom Hanks is always great. He's one of those actors that I really do think he elevates pretty much anything that he's in. If it's a great script, he'll make it better. If it's an okay script, he'll still, his moments will still shine. And he's great in it. Caleb Landry Jones is great. If you love dogs, I mean, this is going to get you in the feels, but I'll say that, we're already saying spoilers. It's the dog does not get hurt. So if you're a big dog lover, I think that you're a dog lover and you're a fan of sci-fi, I think this is not a bad 2 hours to spend your time on. But at the same time, if you're not really, if you look at the trailer, if you look at the premise, if you're not super into it, that wouldn't hurt to skip.
Yeah. The dog gets hurt emotionally, but there's no physical harm to the dog.
No.
All right. So we're going to move on. We're going to talk about Marvel's Eternals. Now, Chris, I can't remember if I mentioned this after we actually started recording or not, but you saw it this morning. I saw it yesterday. We have not talked about it, so I don't know how Chris feels about it. He doesn't know how I feel about it. I will say, first off, and I did say this in my non-spoiler review, I'm a fan of the MCU. This is not one that I was particularly psyched for because I don't know anything about the characters. I've actually been like sort of post Endgame. I mean, Far From Home was cool. Post Endgame, I'm not super psyched about all that much, although I am looking forward to No Way Home. But I wasn't super psyched for this, but I was very curious about it because it was co-written and directed by Chloe Zhao, whom of course directed Nomadland from last year, which not only won Best Picture, it won her Best Director at the Academy Awards. But I was so curious because Nomadland is this incredibly introspective, quiet little movie with not a huge amount of dialogue, not a huge amount of actors. It's a lot of real people kind of improvising and what have you. And this is this huge blockbuster MCU, glitzy, splotchy, splashy. And, as I said in the other review, like a good storyteller is a good storyteller, but like you got to have a different skill set to make a movie like that and to make a movie like this. So I was very curious just to see what this would turn out to be. Before I ask you what you thought about it, what were you anticipating going in? Were you interested? Were you kind of blah on it?
Yeah, I was pretty interested on it. Chloe Zhao is a terrific filmmaker. Like you mentioned, Nomadland, which won her Best Director and won Best Picture. But even her two previous films, called The Writer and Songs My Brother Taught Me, they're very similar to Nomadland, not necessarily in plot, but it's all pretty much shot outside. And Chloe Zhao is clearly very in love with kind of the Midwest, or at least the aesthetic of it. So she shoots the film very handheld, mostly natural light. And like you said, they're very introspective works. Like her last 3 films combined, the budget probably would have maybe covered craft services for a week on
Right.
Eternals. That's how low budget they are. And so I also was curious, thinking will how will her sensibilities as a filmmaker translate to Marvel? And at first, my thought was that they just weren't going to let her do anything, if that makes any sense. Because what's his name? I'm going to look it up for the director of Shang-Chi was an indie film director, Dustin Daniel Cretton.
Yeah, sounds right.
Sorry, while I'm looking that up. But the reason why I bring him up is that they've had other smaller independent filmmakers come on, but I feel like their voices are just consumed by
Right.
the MCU. Like Shang-Chi, I like Shang-Chi. I thought it was fun, but there's not a moment in it that feels like anything like what Destin Daniel Cretton has done before. He's done films like Short Term 12, which are also very small, introverted or introspective little movies. And Shang-Chi, even though it was fun, it felt like the same kind of made by committee Marvel movie. Same with Black Widow and a few others. And I was worried that Chloe Zhao was gonna succumb to that as well. That the MCU would just be like, nope, you're in this box. You're just gonna do what we say. So, but then the trailers started coming out, and you really could start seeing some of the Chloe Zhao isms coming through. I felt like there was going to be something a little different from this movie. So I was pretty excited, but then just this swath of really quite negative reviews started coming out from the critics. It started off kind of divisive, but the more I was reading, even some of the positive ones, like if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, even the ones that are listed as positive are kind of lukewarm at best.
Right.
Some people loved it, but even some of the positive ones are kind of like, oh, this is good, but it didn't seem like this was getting a lot of love. And that definitely, by the time I was walking into the theater today, my expectations were quite lowered. So I went from like being pretty excited to this, thinking this could be really something interesting or special, to being like, I don't even know. If it wasn't for the podcast, maybe I would just rent this. So yeah, that's where I was going into it. But I don't know. Do I want to say what my thoughts were beforehand, or or should you say what you thought of it first?
Either way,
Yeah,
I'll leave.
You
I'll
go
go.
first. I
Okay.
want to know.
Um, I thought this movie was okay. For me, it's lower tier Marvel, um, which is a shame because I celebrate, because I do think that it is different from a lot of Marvel movies. Like, it's got a lot of similarities. It does feel like it belongs in the franchise, but it's far less glossy. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's CGI all over the place, but like a lot of Marvel movies have it almost like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like a bubblegum sensibility to them.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get that so much here. This had um this was pretty steeped in mythology and even religion, and it did feel like its own thing, part of the greater universe, but its own thing. Some of the differences I thought worked really well in its favor. Some of them didn't really work for me. Um, I would say that, you know, I like I said, this is lower tier for me. I applaud what they tried to do with it. I think a lot of it is because I didn't know these characters, and because there were a lot of them to introduce in one movie, it felt kind of overstuffed. So I never, it's not the first Avenger where I just need to get to know Steve and I can lock in with Steve.
Yeah.
And I feel like some of the Eternals, just the Eternals specifically, I feel like some of them were really given their due as far as introduction, and some of them were not. I said in the non-spoiler, there are a couple of the Eternals, I don't remember what their names were. I don't remember what their powers were, or which person has which power. So yeah, I mean, I mostly had a good time watching it, but it's also something like I don't imagine I'll ever watch it again. How about you?
I actually quite like this movie.
Nice.
There's problems that I have with it, and right off the bat, I think that I would say this, I probably would have loved this if this was like an 8 to 10 episode miniseries.
Mm.
Because to me, you hit on what I thought was the biggest problem with this, was that even at like over 2.5 hours, this was just so much story and character to stuff into one movie, where it was just all of this lore just kind of jam packed into it, and 10 characters at least that are just the Eternals, not including like, Kit Harington and or whatever. Um, and you do feel by the end of it like, oh, we didn't really spend that much time with certain characters like Makari, who's the deaf woman that can run really fast, and other characters as well. Even Angelina Jolie, I thought, didn't really have too much to do.
She and Salma Hayek were barely in the movie.
Yeah, and I felt like, man, if this was like a mini series, they probably could have doled out this lore
Right.
kind of slower, so it didn't just feel like just like this info dump. And that noise too, that's what exposition sounds like in my head when I'm just sitting in a theater and people are talking. It's just it's insipid. Anyway, and the characters as well, I think that they could have had more time to kind of grow. But that's really my biggest complaint with it, is that it just kind of felt like it was trying to do too much and it didn't quite do it all in this one movie. But I've still really quite enjoyed it. And I do think that it did a lot of things differently. A lot, like things that are more subtle and things that are more kind of obvious, that compared to other MCU films. And my biggest fear going into this was that Chloe Zhao's voice as a filmmaker was going to be diminished, and that it was just going to be essentially another gun for hire for another Marvel movie. And that really wasn't the case. Where, while I still felt a lot of the Marvel influence creeping in, a lot of the corporate kind of, Disney mandates of like, we have to have these pop songs and it, blah, 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 whatever. I still felt that. But I also really felt Chloe Zhao's directorial style through a lot of it, even in the action scenes, which I was surprised at. There were certain moments during some of the action scenes where I'm like, this wasn't just the typical Marvel MO. Whereas in previous Marvel movies, even before the cameras start rolling, the previs people in effects will just start creating the action scenes whole cloth because out of CGI, and that just kind of attributes to the level of like, this is, most Marvel movies just corporate products, even though I like them, but they're just kind of made by committee as opposed to like one directorial voice. And I don't think that this movie diminished Chloe Zhao's voice. And so I was pretty interested in a lot of the decisions made.
Okay. I will also say one of my favorite things about this movie, I thought it was visually absolutely stunning. Like the costumes were great. I love the look of their ship. I can't remember what it was called, but
the Domo.
Arishem, the way he looked was like so badass. Angelina Jolie's weapon, the way it would sort of come, like form almost like weaving vines or something into like swords and spears, and that was great. Sometimes when characters are talking to Arishem, they go to these sort of astral planes. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, I mean, it was all probably mostly CGI, but again, CGI sometimes gets it's like a dirty word, but if it looks good, it looks good.
But here's the thing, because like you brought up in the beginning how a lot of Marvel movies kind of feel bubblegummy in a way, and the reason, and one of the main reasons for me is that most Marvel movies are kind of shot the same, where it's a lot of kind of medium lenses, which are just kind of flat and boring. And the lighting, they're always either on sets or on green screens, and the lighting is nice and even. So it just kind of looks like this, like you said, this glossy sheen of everything's evenly lit, and there's no, abstract camera angles, not just abstract, but like there's no like major close-ups or wide angle lenses. It's just kind of medium lighting. And so things look boring. But here, I knew this going in, and I was worried that it would be covered up by the CGI, but it really wasn't for the most part. But a lot of this movie was shot on the locations that they were supposed to be. So, places in the Middle East or in the desert, in the Amazon, beaches, yes, etc. And it was shot very handheld by the cinematographer Ben Davies. Um, and it was shot handheld, which is very different than a lot of Marvel movies, and used a lot of natural light. So the cinematography from the very beginning already looked quite different. So just like
Yeah,
aesthetically, it just stands out compared to other Marvel movies. There are moments though where, let's say, all of the Eternals are together eating dinner and the camera's kind of locked down and it's clearly multiple cameras to get coverage of people talking, and that feels like a more traditional Marvel movie. But again, even throughout like the action scenes, there was just this more of a unique voice. I don't know if we're getting into spoilers yet.
sure.
Okay, so yeah, spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen it. Um, I would recommend checking it out in theaters. Court, would you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't love the movie, but if 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 you feel comfortable going to see it in a theater,
Mhm.
do, because it's like I said, it's visually stunning.
Yeah, it is. It is quite the spectacle. The moment I was just going to bring up is kind of around the halfway point when they're in the Amazon in the village that's being controlled by Druig, played by Barry Cogan. I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's like the deviants are attacking, and it just reminded me of the Revenant with Leo
Hmm,
DiCaprio, because there's a moment of Richard Madden's Icarus just being like, it's like shot handheld, the camera's low to the ground looking up, and he's just being tossed around in this one kind of confined location by this deviant. And it was brutal and it was visceral, and it just didn't look like this glossy kind of comic book splash page. It felt like
right.
it felt cinematic, where it felt like this is happening in a real location, and it's almost like a run and gun documentary type of filmmaking of like getting in close to them and pulling out. And um so there's little moments like that even throughout the action scenes that I felt Chloe Zhao's directorial influence.
Okay, now that's another thing I want to talk about. Um, Throughout most of the movie, the central villains are the deviants, and we do
uh
learn later on that there are other efforts at play. But for most of the movie, the villains are the deviants. They did nothing for me. I didn't, they're just kind of big CGI monster cannon fodder. There wasn't
mhm.
any kind of character development there. There wasn't any kind of motivation. I didn't particularly like the way that they looked. I didn't find them
uh
scary. It was kind of a situation of every time a deviant showed, I was really like, "Oh, the deviants are back," which is not what you want for your villain, you know?
Yeah, it was weird because I actually kind of liked the design, the sinewy kind of design of them. I thought that was interesting looking, but you're right that they're pretty much just used for cannon fodder, and it they really always kind of come up and don't really feel like a threat. It's more just kind of like, oh well, we've been talking for like 20 minutes. We should probably have an action scene. In
Yeah.
fact, there's kind of a meta moment in that same kind of Amazon rainforest forest action sequence where Kumail Nanjiani's character Kingo, he has a valet that follows him around with a camera that documents everything. And there's a moment where Kingo tells him while the deviants are attacking to like, "Are you filming this?" And his valet is like, "We need to have action scenes." And I
Right.
really felt like that was like Kevin Feige or someone from Marvel just being like, "Man, there's a lot of talking. Why don't you have the deviants just come in and attack right now?"
Right.
Um, but
Well,
there
and
was no, yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and because of that, there there wasn't really, I didn't really feel many stakes from the deviants, even though they do prove to be lethal. And they this movie shows that they weren't afraid to kind of kill off some of the Eternals. So it's not like everybody gets off scot-free. But at the same time, they ended up not even really being the main threat.
Yeah.
And the eventual like sentient deviant that kind of was created, who gives a shit, because he really
I
just kind
mean,
of came up and was like, I'm evil and blah blah blah. And then he fought Angelina Jolie for a bit, then he died, and then the movie continued. Like it
mhm.
wasn't like he was the big boss, he was just kind of there. And I was like, you didn't even really need him. Like I can understand having the other animalistic deviants throughout just to kind of have action scenes, because Marvel fans would complain if there wasn't any action. But by the end, you didn't need to have that sentient one. You could have just fucking had it. You just could have had everything else that was happening was already pretty high stakes. It's just focus on that.
Well, and that's the thing. Like once it started getting um sentient, like you said, started talking. That was Bill Skarsgård, by the way. I didn't know that, but that was Bill Skarsgård doing the voice. Yeah. I just I saw his name in the credits. I was like, who the hell was he?
Is that Pennywise, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I always mix up the Skarsgårds.
Yeah.
So just holy crap. Okay.
All right. But like
he didn't have much to do. Holy shit.
No. And that's the thing. Like once he became sentient and started talking, and his voice sounded really good, I was convinced that was going to be a reveal of like a major character going forward.
Yeah.
Nope. Dead. Gone.
Yeah.
And that's another thing for me. I mean, the stakes in this movie are really, really big. Maybe not Infinity War big in that it's not going to kill 50% of the life in the entire universe, but it's going to kill everybody on Earth. Everyone's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't care. And maybe that's because I don't know these characters, and maybe it's because they didn't do a good enough job selling them to me or whatever. But like I said in the non-spoiler review, like in that final act when it's a race against time to save the entire planet, I was kind of like, if the bad guys win, it is what it is.
I gotta disagree. This is actually the first time. Well, I'll agree with you that I didn't feel as much for the characters themselves as I should have. I think that if this is a miniseries, and at this point, if this was like the 8th episode or 10th episode, we'd spend all this time with these characters, then that would have been awesome.
Yeah.
However, I actually quite felt the state. It really did feel kind of apocalyptic by the end for me, as compared to, I don't know, like again, like Shang-Chi when there's like a giant bat dragon. I was kind of like, okay, they're gonna kill it. It's fine. But this really felt like holy shit, like it didn't feel like an evil plan. I think it didn't feel like an evil plan of like an evil villain trying to nuke the entire planet, but it just kind of felt like this almost incidental thing that was going to happen to the planet.
Yeah, this is just the way that things go.
Yeah, and I think that because it felt so almost like an act of nature, that I kind of felt the stakes. Maybe not for the characters, but for the planet. I just felt like this shit could this shit could end poorly. I don't know what they're gonna if this is gonna be an endgame type situation where something terrible happens to Earth and they have to, reverse it. But I really felt like I kind of put myself in the positions of just like being on Earth as this is happening and just being like, holy shit, it's the end of the world. And also by the end of it, I wasn't convinced that that all of them were going to make it. I mean, they killed off Angelina Jolie. They killed off the actor playing Gilgamesh, who is from Train to Busan, which is an awesome movie.
It is.
And so by that point, I was like, oh man, they could kill Makari, the fast runner. They could kill any of them. So I thought that I like the stakes of the ending.
Okay. What was I going to say? I had a point. Oh, I think maybe one of the reasons why it didn't work for me is that because I think maybe it got mentioned to a couple people, but outside of the Eternals, like nobody on Earth knew that this was going to happen. I feel like if you had some like human moments with people, I mean, off the top of my head, there's that shot in Titanic where you just see the mother cradling her 2 kids, crying as the room is filling up. Like if we'd had a little bit of that to sort of humanize it, I think that would have gone a long way for me. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of wasn't feeling the tension. Also, to be fair, I was incredibly tired and the movie is long.
It's a long one.
I was kind of like, okay, wrap it up. I need a nap.
Yeah.
So there is that, but
no, I think that makes sense. I think that could have probably helped as well, having kind of reaction shots or just showing that humans are understanding that like the end of the world is happening.
Right.
I mean, the fact that we already have like a human character introduced as in Kit Harington, they could have shown him maybe at the university or wherever he was, so I agree. I think they could have done that, and that probably could have even helped you feel the stakes, but also could have raised the stakes even more for me.
I did find it funny that this movie has Robb Stark and Jon Snow, and they're both friends with Cersei. That was just weird.
Yeah, it's like, was this intentional? I feel like there was a little bit of intention. It wasn't just happenstance of like, oh, hey, what a coincidence. They were like, put them back together.
Yeah, I mean, like it's not like we weren't gonna notice, right?
Yeah.
You can't, well, I mean you could, but you're not gonna change the character Cersei's name and it is spelled differently. But if you're gonna cast Richard Madden and Kit Harington, we're gonna notice. I'm sorry, we're gonna.
Yeah, it was, and I wish that they had more screen time together. It was just kind of one moment, but
Kit Harington's barely in the movie. I think he had 3 scenes, right?
Yeah, I know it's a bummer, and I hope that they set up that he's probably going to do more. That's kind of in the post-credit scene, but which we'll get to. So I hope to see more of him because I like Kit Harington, and he seemed like I liked that he wasn't. I don't know. They didn't give him much to do, but usually when there's like a new love interest, and then like the main character, let's say Gemma Chan in this case, she's like a new love interest, but she also kind of has feelings for her ex. A lot of times the movies kind of paint the new boyfriend as like this dick or kind of like to make you care more about the old relationship. Right. So I like that he just seemed like he seemed like a chill dude. And even when he found out that she was, an Eternal, he was chill about it. So I'm like, good on you, Kit Harington. I hope to see more of you in the sequel.
Well, and I guess we should probably talk about the mid and post credit scenes. I will admit, I didn't stay for the post. I was too tired, couldn't do it. I was like, I can read about it online. It's gonna be fine. So
did you read about it or?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So the mid credit sequence, we see, who is it? I believe it's Makari.
Druig by Barry Keegan.
Right.
And Angelina Jolie.
Right. And they're hanging out on the ship. And then I forget his name, something the troll.
Patton Oswalt.
Patton Oswalt voices this little CGI troll, and he introduces the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, whatever.
Yeah.
And then in comes Harry Styles as Eros, who is apparently the brother to Thanos. He's humanoid. Well, Thanos was humanoid, but he looks human, like he's not a CGI character.
He doesn't look like a purple nutsack, which I have questions. Right. I have questions the movie did not answer.
There's the milkman, I tell you.
Yeah, I know. The milkman. What is it, Grimace?
Yeah.
Was the milkman?
Right. But so he comes in, and I don't know much about Eros. No. Let's be honest, I don't know anything about Eros. I know he's based on the Greek god of love, I think. So apparently this character is kind of he's not a bad guy the way Thanos was. He's kind of a good guy. He says he's there to help. He knows where their friends are because a number of the Eternals at the end of the movie go and sort of square off with Arishem, and then they kind of disappear into a black hole. So it's sort of setting up that Harry Styles is going to help them find their friends. And apparently as a character, he's kind of a goof, but a sweetheart, and he's helpful, and he imbues people with self-confidence, and I don't know, something like that. So I thought that was a fun little scene. Did you have anything about it that you wanted to talk about?
Well, it was one of those like where I just didn't want to be a curmudgeon about it because I felt like this means nothing to me. Like I don't know anything about the character. I was, I was a teenage boy by the time that One Direction was popular, so it did not appeal to me. So right. I have no feelings towards Harry Styles one way or the other. He seems nice. Like I have nothing against him. He was good.
He was good in Dunkirk.
Yeah. Even though he didn't have much to do, he didn't feel like an out of place kind of pop star. He felt like an actor. So if the guy wants to go into acting, then good for him. So for the few like teenage girls that squealed in my theater when he showed up, and I'm sure in many theaters there was a lot of squealing teenage girls. Good for them. This was clearly like this is a big kind of teen heartthrob. So it's a good get from Marvel. I have nothing against it, but it wasn't this. Seeing Harry Styles did nothing to raise my excitement for that character or anything. What I will say is, if those characters do come back and they don't just pull like a what's his name, a Howard the Duck, where they just show them at the end. If those characters do come back, they got to work on that CGI,
on the troll. Yeah,
that did not look good, and I was like, he's so not there. Like we were just talking about like Finch, where it's like maybe it's not the greatest CGI in the world, but you don't question it. It's just kind of like, yeah, this is a robot, and it's a real character. This just looked like a video game cutscene.
Yeah,
and then it was next to like a real life actor. I'm like, oh, they gotta fix that.
I was actually kind of wondering if maybe that mid-credit scene, maybe they did that in pickups, like in the second round of shooting because they
Mm.
thought of where they wanted to go, and then they were low on budget for the CGI or low on time for the CGI. I don't know, but yeah,
Yeah.
for a movie where most of the CGI was pretty strong,
Yeah.
that really stood out. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. But yeah, it was an okay mid credit scene, and then the post credit scene, which you didn't see, but you're aware of it.
I kind of know what
Also,
happens. Yeah.
it's there's not too much to it. Again, it's more like that's some fun implications, but it doesn't really show you much, and it'll be fun if they deliver on it, which they might not, because it really, to me, it seems like these MCU post credit scenes, I don't know if it's exactly 50-50, but it feels kind of hit or miss on whether or not they actually follow up on what they set up. Again, there's like Howard the Duck, and then there's certain, I don't know, there's certain times when it's just usually used for a laugh. But the end credit scene essentially is Kid Harrington. He was alluding to it by the end of the movie that his family history. There's more to his family history than he even realized, and then he led on to Cersei. And it's revealed without showing him in costuming or anything that he is also another character from the comics. I believe it's the Black Knight.
Yeah.
And so they show him with a sword, and so it's kind of teasing that he's going to be maybe super powered up by the next time, or the next time we see him, he's not just going to be only a human that's kind of a sidekick. Maybe he's doing much more. So that alone in and of itself could have been a tease. But what's really interesting to me is that you hear a voice off screen that's essentially like, "Are you sure you want to do that, Dane?" And I didn't know who it was at the time. I was kind of like, because they didn't show him. They just show the voice. Kid Harington looks and they cut away. But the voice is of Mahershala Ali as Blade.
Yeah.
And apparently, again, I know nothing about this character, but apparently there are several runs of Blade where him and this character of Dane Whitman as the Black Knight kind of team up and do shit in London. And I'm like, that sounds dope. I want to see that.
There was something about I can't remember. They were called like MI13 or something. They were kind of like British Avengers or something, and they were both on the team. And apparently Black Knight in some runs is actually the leader of the Avengers. So I think they're probably gearing up to do something pretty major with Kit Harington. You're not going to get Kit Harington for the love interest for 3 scenes.
No.
To not build to something. And I just think it's funny, like this movie is pretty meta when it comes to Game of Thrones with Cersei and Robb Stark and Jon Snow. But also now he's going to be playing the Black Knight, whereas on Game of Thrones he was a knight who wore all black, black hair. Like, I just think it's kind of funny.
It was very intentional casting on their part. Yeah, but I know that we're jumping around, but I do actually have a bit more to say about the movie proper. Okay. One thing that I really liked about this movie, even though there was a lot of lore, is that this I thought it was a pretty cerebral Marvel movie. Not like it was super difficult to understand the themes or anything, but I actually quite liked that at the end of the day, even though there was CGI battles and there was it was a bit of a CGI punch up, which is Marvel's MO. Regardless of that, it really, the main conflict boiled down to kind of this morality choice that I thought was kind of refreshing as far as Marvel goes, because typically it's like good guy, bad guy, punch him until he's either dead or he gives up. Like that's it. And that wasn't the case here. And it was really, essentially the main conflict in the story is that the Celestials, which are like these gigantically huge, celestial beings, as it implies, they're kind of like gods in a way, and then they create the cosmos. And essentially the way that they cultivate and create new celestials, which happens once every billion years or something, is that they find a planet that's ripe enough with enough energy for the celestial to consume and then be born. So basically, for a celestial to be born, there's one inside of Earth. It has to destroy the Earth, which means obviously 8 billion people die and every single living animal dies. But in being born, the celestial will go off and create like galaxies or solar systems. So it really is like, on one hand, billions of lives are going to be lost if the Earth is destroyed, but trillions, if not more, lives will be made in however many planets. And not only did they bring that up, but the characters actually debate it, and the characters themselves are split on it. It's not just the Eternals team up to fight the bad guys. It's like the Eternals are split on like, what should we do?
That was actually something I really liked, where
Mhm.
again, I forget his name, but Kumail Nanjiani's character, Kingo, sort of they're having this, Richard Madden's Icarus has kind of done the villain turn, in that this is what Arishem commands, and this he's going to make sure this happens. If he has to kill all the rest of them, he will. So the rest of them are sort of having a conversation. What are we going to do? And Kingo basically says, he's like, I don't agree with you. I think all these other lives need to be created, but I won't fight you guys either, because you guys are my friends, you guys are my family. So I'm just going to take myself out of the situation and leave. I really like that, because he's not being a hero, but he's not being a villain. He's just saying, this is a conflict of morality. I'm taking myself out of the equation. I thought that was a bold choice, really, for like a Marvel movie.
For sure. Yeah. It's something that you don't see, it's a hero that's we've shown has superpowers, and he's choosing not to fight one way or the other. I
love that his superpowers were finger guns. Anyway, sorry.
No, I thought that was interesting as well. And again, I thought it was interesting in general that these characters couldn't really agree on what was the right thing to do. And even there was even like infighting amongst infighting, because it was sort of like some of them, like Richard Madden and Sprite. The Eternal that's forever in a young girl's body, which would suck. Or it reminded me of Interview with the Vampire and Kirsten Dunst's character. That's just a nightmare. Anyway, but they're like, listen, we have to let the what is it, the emergence? We have to let that continue. And there's a group that say like, no, we don't. Like, we're going to stop it. But then even in the group that says they want to stop it, some of them are like, let's just put the Celestial to sleep. And some are like, let's kill it. And they're even debating about that. It's like, well, do we have the right? This is like a god. Like, do we have the right to end life? And again, it's just, there was more heady stuff than your typical Marvel movie. And it's stuff that made me, that I'm still thinking about, even though I saw it just this morning. I'm still kind of thinking about it, of like, what would be the correct thing to do in that situation?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Do you have anything else you want to bring up?
Yeah, I just thought that in the ways that it did feel like a Marvel movie, where there was action beats throughout, and there was some kind of modern humor. Some of it made me laugh. There were some things that, like Kingo, the character, said that was funny. I liked that he essentially became this Bollywood star and passed himself off as like his great grandfather, great grandfather, etc., just to continue to be like this lineage of famous Bollywood stars.
I gotta say, dude's got moves.
Oh yeah, for sure. Kumail was great in this. I really liked it. I liked a lot of the characters in it, even though a lot of them weren't given the time that they were due. Like, I liked Makari, the speedster, but she really only came in like the third act, and then she was cool, and she was like doing sign language, because the actress is actually deaf. But I was like, why did we wait until the last like 30 minutes to introduce this character? But what I was gonna say was that, despite a lot of the Marvelness throughout it, there was still a lot of it as well that just felt like some weird kind of, heavy sci-fi book that you would read, because it's about these eternal beings that come down to Earth, and they kind of influence society, and they watch society from the sidelines. And I thought that was interesting. Like, even though it felt kind of jarring to jump back and forth in time, it was interesting to see, like the city of Babylon in all its glory. And it was interesting to see their kind of debates about whether or not they should interfere with human events, because they watched things such as the fall of Tenochtitlan by the Spaniards. And probably pronounced that horribly, but you see certain moments throughout history where it's like they could have done something, and many of them want to do something, but it goes against their Star Trek Prime directive. And again, it's just more it's more philosophical stuff
Yeah.
than sort of punchy the bad guy in the face.
Well, that's one thing that I found really interesting about Barry Keoghan's character is that like he's a guy who basically has mind control. If he wanted to, he could stop war, and he does want to, but they sort of convince him not to the point where he leaves. He fucks off and he goes and lives in the Amazon. And I did think for a good chunk of the second act that they were positioning him to be the villain for the end of the movie, because he was getting very like confrontational and whatever. And I will also say this: I haven't seen Barry Keoghan in too many things, but he's no disrespect, but he's a strange looking dude. He actually looks a lot like he's the British Cyclops, whatever that guy's name is. Ready Player One guy.
Oh, I can't even think of that guy's name. I know, but they do look alike. I totally agree, though. Yeah.
But like he's always, or at least in everything I've seen, he's always playing like kind of an introverted, kind of quiet character. By the end of this movie, I was like, this guy's a badass. This guy's cool. He's got a leather jacket on.
Oh man, yeah. No, I loved it because it was funny because you're right. They showed him a lot of him just kind of being like in the Amazon, almost like this weird kind of cult leader. And I was like, oh, this guy's weird. But then after he gets out of the Amazon, like you said, he's got this cool leather jacket on. He's fucking macking on Makari, which I really liked. Like he just kind of like struts up to her. He's like, yeah, you missed me. I was like, where's this character been? I would have called this guy not weird like Jonestown guy in the Amazon.
Yeah. Yeah. I did appreciate, and I think there are the people who think that you're only allowed to be a Marvel fan or a DC fan. I go both ways. I like them both. I don't care. I'm talking Eternals. I'm wearing a Batman shirt, but I did appreciate, and I think this will piss a lot of people off. It definitely pissed off my friend Rich. I liked that there were like Batman and Superman references in this movie. I thought that was fun. Did that stand out to you?
I mean, I noticed them. I don't know why it would upset anyone. I mean, Marvel's referenced, even in this movie, they reference Star Wars. And it's like, not only does the same company own Star Wars, but like there's so many actors that have been in Star Wars movies as well. It doesn't make sense if you really think about it. It didn't bother me. I mean, I like the idea that, if in this case you can't have a Marvel comics in the Marvel movies, but you can have DC comics. So, hey, guy, I don't know if anyone that's upset about it. Just think of it this way: in the MCU, there's only DC, so you guys win. For all you guys that want to fight about it, there's only Batman, there's only Superman in the MCU. So, way to go, DC, you did it.
Indeed. You got anything else, or I think we're good?
No, we can wrap it up. Again, I would say if anybody's on the fence, I'd say check it out for yourself. This does seem to be a very divisive film. I know this is not how Rotten Tomatoes works, but if you look at the negative score on Rotten Tomatoes, I would say that I wouldn't agree with it. I would if I just walked out of this theater not knowing what the score was, I would have assumed that this skewed more positive than negative. But that being said, it is kind of messy. I wouldn't call it a mess, but it's messy. It's kind of too much to be crammed even into this admittedly long movie. But there's so much about it that I quite enjoyed. I think it's unique enough from the other Marvel movies. It has enough of Chloe Zhao's vision behind it. There's enough interesting ideas that's more complex than most Marvel films. So I would definitely recommend it.
I'm with you again. I do think it's lower tier Marvel. In that I didn't find it as fun as a lot of the other ones, but I do think it's visually just incredible. Definitely worth seeing on big screen for that alone. And it's nice that it's something a little bit different. So even though I didn't love it, it's definitely a recommendation for me.
Okay, right on.
Okay, so that is the show. Of course, I believe next week we're going to be talking Ghostbusters, right?
Does it come out next week?
I think so.
Okay.
Is it the 12th? Does that sound right?
I don't know. I don't even know. Where am I?
I think it's next week.
Okay.
Well, I guess we'll find out. But,
it says November 19th for me.
Okay. Okay.
So next week.
Right. All right. Well, so we don't know what we're going to be talking about next week, but
we'll have something good for you guys next week.
Don't
worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we go, Chris, where can people follow you online?
I have an Instagram handle called Art of Light and Shadow. It's a fun kind of daily cinema blog where I kind of rank my favorite movies. I do a lot of community-based stuff, a lot of things where my followers can vote on what their favorite things are. It's a fun time. So if you're interested in both modern movies, classics, foreigns, art house movies, check it out, Art of Light and Shadow.
And of course, Andris was not here today, but if you want to check him out, go on YouTube, do a search for Cheap Thrills, Unspeakable Terror. He does reviews of sort of horror, sci-fi, low-budget B movies from the dawn of cinema to the modern era. Check out his channel. It's great. I'm a big fan. And of course, for me, if you want to check me out on Instagram and Twitter, I don't post that much, but you can find me at Courtshake. Of course, you're already on my YouTube channel, so if you haven't subscribed yet, I would love you forever for it. Of course, we want to encourage you guys to drop a like on this podcast if you did enjoy the video, just to help share it around so we can grow this channel. We'd appreciate that very much. And obviously, jump into the comments. Tell us what you thought of Eternals. Tell us what you thought of Finch. And as always, I want to remind you that you can find audio-only versions of our podcasts, Mass Media Hysteria, at places like Google Podcasts and Spotify. So go check that out if that's better for you. We want to thank you guys for watching. As always, we want to just say, stay safe, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everyone.